Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and Restless official. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. At Chancellor Winter's, Nate suggested that he and Devon call it quits for the night, and he offered to buy his cousin a drink at the club. Devon said it was the best offer he'd had all day. At the athletic club, Tucker joined Audra at a table and voiced surprise that he'd heard from her that soon after their last conversation. He ordered his usual drink, and she instructed the server to put it on her tab. Tucker marveled that it was the deluxe apology, and Audra wrote off their last encounter as a few angry words between old friends. Tucker wondered if she was becoming as mercurial as everyone said he was. Tucker surmised that he was rubbing off on Audra. She countered that it wasn't in the right ways, since she wasn't rich beyond her wildest dreams, like him. Not yet, he replied, and he insinuated that he could change that for her. Audra referred to the plan he'd mentioned, and Tucker recalled that she'd turned him down. He assumed she'd changed her mind, and he inquired whether his pitch had gotten under her skin or if he was just that irresistible. Audra denied that she found Tucker irresistible, but she thought his offer to work with him might be. Tucker pointed out that she'd emphatically declined earlier, and he asked what had changed. She claimed that she'd had a knee-jerk reaction to the mention of Jabot, but she'd had time to think things through and become calmer. Tucker sensed that something was different, since she'd been adamant that she was done with him in all ways. Audra announced that she'd decided to leave Newman Media because there was no upward mobility for her there, and there were better options on the table. Tucker was skeptical that she'd just realized that, and Audra flatly asked if the offer was still on the table. Tucker informed her that it was, but only if she was honest with him. He guessed Nikki had fired her. He concluded from Audra's silence that he was right. Audra insisted that she'd quit, and she dared Tucker to ask Nikki about it himself. Audra muttered that it wasn't the pleasant drink and chat she'd hoped for. She spotted Nate enter the club. Tucker followed her gaze and concluded that something was going on between Audra and Nate, and he was sure it was related to her quitting her job. Devon joined Nate, completely ignoring Tucker, whose expression darkened. Devon briefly glanced over at Tucker and asked if Nate was still friends with Audra. Nate hesitated to call her a friend, but Devon recalled that the two had been close enough to do deals together. Nate swore that he'd learned his lesson, and while he and Audra were still polite to one another, he didn't consider it a friendship. Devon detected a vibe between them. Nate said it was beyond him why she still gave Tucker her attention, and he called it a messed-up codependency because the guy was toxic. Nate quickly apologized, but Devon declared that he'd reached the same conclusion. Nate was glad that he and Devon were able to spend time together again because family meant everything. Devon hoped Nate wasn't about to encourage him to reach out to Tucker. Nate empathized that it was hard for Devon not to have his father in his life, but Devon figured that Tucker had never really been around, so it wasn't that hard. Devon added that he'd had the only father he'd ever need, and Tucker would never be half the man Neil had been. Devon griped that he couldn't trust a single word out of Tucker's mouth, and he didn't want someone like that in his life. Meanwhile, Audra sympathized that Devon had blown Tucker off. Tucker claimed he hadn't noticed, but she considered his love for his son to be one of his most endearing qualities. Tucker asked about the others, and Audra envisioned giving him a list of his good points so he could tape it to his mirror to remind himself that he was part of the human race. He admired her skill set, including the simmering looks, clever jabs, and underhanded compliments. She commented that he made her sound fascinating, and he insisted she was. Tucker recounted that he'd opened a vein when he'd bared his soul to Audra, and she'd shut him down without batting an eye. He scoffed at the idea that she was filled with regret after she'd supposedly quit her lucrative job, and he accused her of using his estrangement with Devon to pretend she cared while she exchanged sly looks with Nate. Tucker dryly asked if she was part of the human race, and he said he was dying to know about the long con she was playing. Tucker observed that Nate was trying hard not to look at Audra, and he suspected that Nate fit into whatever she was up to. Audra speculated that perhaps she just liked looking at Nate because he was an attractive man. Tucker pointed out that Nate kept looking at her, and she argued that she was an attractive woman. Tucker called her dangerous, and he pushed to know what was going on with her and Nate. Audra claimed that she and Nate were sleeping together. "No, you're not," Tucker knowingly replied. Tucker added that he couldn't care less if Audra and Nate were sleeping together because she'd just be using sex again as a means to some end. Tucker pondered what that end was, but Audra ordered him to focus on their partnership. "Who said I still want to partner with you?" Tucker queried. Audra scoffed at the idea that he'd offered her the world only to change his mind. Tucker claimed that he was thinking about it, and he got up to leave. "Gentlemen," he said as he passed Devon and Nate's table. Devon didn't acknowledge his father. Devon ranted that everything about Tucker was a lie, and he was annoyed that Tucker felt like he could pull one over on anyone he wanted. Devon continued that it had been bad enough when he'd been in the dark about things, but it had gotten worse when he'd found out that Tucker had played him like a sucker. Nate imagined that the news had destabilized Tucker's new company, so it would be better for everyone if Tucker tried to manage it from France. Nate questioned why Tucker would stick around Genoa City when everyone hated him unless he was still holding out hope Devon might forgive him one day. Devon figured that Tucker always thought he could win, and he doubted Tucker would let anyone think he'd been chased away. Devon compared it to how Nate had been determined to have his family forgive him, but Nate defended that what he'd done had been nothing compared to what Tucker had pulled over the years. Devon asserted that the difference was that Nate had proven he could change and make amends, whereas Tucker had proven that he couldn't or wouldn't. Devon realized he needed to get home, and he thanked Nate for the drink. After Devon left, Nate and Audra locked eyes. Nate crossed over to Audra's table, and he wondered why Tucker had been eyeing him. Audra informed him that it had been about Nate eyeing her, and she cautioned that he needed to work on that. She added that Nate had given her the perfect suggestion for how to take Glissade from Tucker by undermining him from the inside, so she had to get back in Tucker's good graces. Nate grumbled that it was an excuse for her to get sucked back in again, but Audra insisted that she knew exactly what she was doing. Nate warned that Tucker knew, too. Audra recognized that it was how the game was played for her and Tucker, and it was her time to win. At Newman Media, Victor found Nikki's office door locked, and he knocked and called out to ask if she was there. Inside the office, Nikki and Jack remained silent. After Victor walked away, Nikki sighed deeply and remarked that it had been close. Jack grumbled that it had been a long time since he'd felt the need to sneak around, and he didn't miss the feeling. He warned her against keeping secrets, but she reminded him that it was what they'd agreed upon. Jack questioned whether Nikki was sure she wouldn't tell Victor that Jack was her new sponsor. Victor returned to Newman Enterprises and made a call. Nikki panicked when she saw an incoming call from her husband. Jack urged her to take it, and she answered. Victor mentioned that he'd found the doors locked at her office, and he thought she'd left for the night, but then he'd seen her car in the garage. She lied that she'd gone out for a walk, and she asked if he needed to see her. Victor invited her to dinner, and she agreed to meet him at his office. After Nikki hung up, Jack observed how keeping the truth from Victor was affecting her. She assured him she could handle it, and she reiterated that it would be best if Victor didn't know Jack was involved. She explained that being in that position made her feel ashamed, since she couldn't string 2 days together without feeling the urge to drink. She groaned that she knew how the program worked, and she thought she should have beaten her addiction weeks earlier.